You've been told a comforting story about the new American frontier. A story of booming cities, endless opportunity, and a mass exodus from the failing states of the past. For over a decade, the narrative has been clear. Flee the high taxes and regulations of places like California and New York, and find your paradise in the Sun Belt. Cities like Austin, Phoenix, and the crown jewel, Houston, Texas, became the promised land for millions of Americans seeking a better life, affordable homes, and a piece of the American dream. The media called them boomtowns. The politicians called them the future. But what if that story was a lie? What if the foundation of these gleaming new cities was built not on rock, but on sand? And what if the tide is finally going out? We are now witnessing the beginning of what we call the Great Reversal. New data, the kind they don't talk about on the nightly news, is painting a terrifying picture. The very cities that were hailed as America's saviors are now showing the classic warning signs of catastrophic economic decline. They are on a trajectory to become America's next generation of ghost towns, and it's happening faster than anyone is prepared for. This isn't about some forgotten mining town in the Wild West. We're talking about major metropolitan hubs, home to millions of people who have staked their entire lives and savings on a promise that is about to be broken. And at the top of that watch list is a city that was once the undisputed champion of American growth, Houston, Texas. How did we get here? How did the dream curdle into a nightmare so quickly? And is your city next? Stay with us as we unpack the numbers, expose the truth, and reveal the new map of America's state of ruin. When you hear the words Ghost Town, your mind probably jumps to dusty images of the Old West. Saloons with swinging doors, abandoned gold mines, tumbleweeds rolling down an empty main street. Those places were victims of a boom and bust cycle. A resource would be discovered, a town would spring up overnight, and when the resource ran out, the people vanished, leaving behind skeletal remains. But in the 21st century, the definition of a ghost town has evolved. It's no longer about a complete absence of people. The modern ghost town is a city hollowed out from the inside. It's a place that still has a population, but it's bleeding residents, jobs, and investment. It's defined by thousands of vacant homes, boarded-up storefronts, and crumbling infrastructure that the city can no longer afford to maintain. Think of parts of Detroit after the auto industry collapsed, or Baltimore, with entire neighborhoods of abandoned row houses. These are not empty deserts, they are urban husks. They are places where the economic heart has stopped beating. The decline is slow, then all at once. Property values plummet, but nobody is buying. The tax base evaporates, leading to cuts in essential services like police, fire, and sanitation. Crime rates rise, schools close. The people who can afford to leave do, creating a downward spiral that traps those who remain. This is the fate we've seen play out in the Rust Belt for the last 50 years. It was a tragedy, we were told, but it was a tragedy of the past. The future was being built elsewhere. The future was in the South. For the last 15 years, the media has sold you the boomtown myth. And it was an easy story to sell because for a while it seemed true. We saw the U-Haul trucks heading in one direction, south. Companies relocated their headquarters to Texas and Florida, lured by the promise of zero state income tax and minimal regulation. Tech bros priced out of Silicon Valley found a new haven in Austin. Families from Illinois and New Jersey flocked to the sprawling suburbs of Houston and Dallas, drawn by the promise of a bigger house for half the price. It was the great migration of our time. These cities weren't just growing, they were exploding. Cranes dotted the skylines, New housing developments devoured farmland at a breathtaking pace. Houston, in particular, was the poster child. Fueled by the powerful oil and gas industry and a massive port, it was an economic juggernaut, adding over 1 million residents in a single decade. It was proof that the low-tax, pro-business model worked. It was America's city of the future. But every boom contains the seeds of its own bust. The relentless pursuit of growth at all costs creates deep-seated vulnerabilities. And the architects of this boom, the politicians and developers, never planned for a single moment of slowdown. They sold the sizzle, but ignored the rot that was festering underneath. And now, the bill is coming due. The Great Reversal is not a single event. It's a convergence of crises that are hitting these boomtowns all at once, exposing their fragile foundations. The first crack in the dam is the very thing that fueled the boom, the economy. The low-regulation, business-friendly environment attracted specific industries, making these cities dangerously reliant on a few economic engines. Houston is the prime example. Its fortunes are inextricably linked to the volatile price of oil. When oil is booming, Houston booms. But when the market turns, the city faces a devastating contraction. The recent global push towards green energy, whether you agree with it or not, is an existential threat to Houston's core identity. The high-paying jobs in the oil and gas sector are not being replaced at the same rate. We are seeing a slow, steady bleed of capital and talent. Similarly, Austin branded itself as Silicon Hills. It attracted a flood of tech companies and remote workers. But now, the tech industry is facing its own reckoning. Massive layoffs at major companies mean that the wave of high-earning transplants has crested. The jobs that were once a sure thing are now vanishing. The second, and perhaps most insidious factor, is the cost of living paradox. The primary sales pitch for these cities was affordability. But what happens when millions of people respond to that sales pitch? Predictably, the cost of living skyrockets. The tidal wave of new residents, many of them carrying cash from selling their expensive homes in California or New York, created a housing frenzy. Bidding wars, once the exclusive domain of coastal elites, became commonplace in the suburbs of Dallas and Phoenix. Home prices in many of these boomtowns doubled in less than a decade, and with rising home values came the killer that no one talks about: soaring property taxes. Texas may not have a state income tax, but it has some of the highest property tax rates in the entire country. New residents who thought they were escaping a heavy tax burden suddenly found themselves with annual property tax bills of $10,000, $15,000, or even $20,000 on a modest suburban home. The dream of affordable home ownership quickly turned into a trap, with families finding that their single biggest expense was just the tax to keep the house they already owned. The third horseman of this urban apocalypse is infrastructure failure. These cities grew too fast, with little to no long-term planning. The model was endless sprawl. Cheap land on the outskirts was bulldozed for cookie-cutter subdivisions, with no thought given to the consequences. This has created a traffic nightmare of epic proportions. Commute times in cities like Austin and Houston now rival those of Los Angeles, but it's far worse than just traffic. The infrastructure itself is on the brink of collapse. We all witnessed the Texas power grid fail during a winter storm in 2021, leaving millions without heat or electricity in freezing temperatures. This wasn't a freak accident. It was a direct result of a deregulated system that prioritized profit over reliability. Furthermore, many of these Sunbelt cities are on the front lines of climate change. Houston is a low-lying city built on a swamp. Its endless miles of concrete sprawl have destroyed the natural wetlands that once absorbed rainwater, leading to more frequent and devastating floods. The cost of flood insurance is becoming prohibitive, and many are finding their homes are simply uninsurable. In places like Phoenix, the crisis is water. As the Colorado River dries up, the city is facing a future where it may not have enough water to sustain its population. Yet the construction of new homes continues unabated. It's a recipe for a humanitarian disaster. Finally, we have the human element, the great regret. We're now hearing stories from thousands of people who made the move and wish they could turn back the clock. They were sold a dream, but they found a different reality. They left behind their communities and support networks only to find themselves in sprawling, anonymous suburbs with no sense of place. They're trapped in homes that are now declining in value, while their property taxes and utility bills continue to rise. They are financially and emotionally stranded. This isn't just anecdotal evidence. A recent study published in the journal Nature Cities predicted that nearly half of all US cities could face some level of depopulation by the year 2100, effectively becoming ghost towns. And the models show that the cities most at risk are not the old Rust Belt dinosaurs, but many of the sprawling, rapidly grown cities in the South and Southwest. They are simply not built to be sustainable. Let's focus our lens on Houston, because it is the canary in the coal mine for the Great Reversal. For years, the city's official slogan was, "The city with no limits." It was a celebration of its unrestrained, unplanned, unregulated growth. That slogan has now become a cruel joke. The lack of zoning in Houston created a chaotic urban landscape where industrial plants could be built next to schools and massive freeways sliced through historic neighborhoods. This anything-goes approach fueled the boom, but it created a city that is fundamentally unlivable for many. The reliance on the automobile is absolute. Public transportation is an afterthought. If you don't have a car, you are a prisoner in your own home. The endless sprawl has also had severe environmental consequences. As mentioned, the catastrophic flooding during Hurricane Harvey was not just a natural disaster, it was a man-made crisis, exacerbated by decades of paving over paradise. Yet, instead of addressing the root cause, the city continues to approve new developments in known floodplains. The economic engine of oil and gas, once a source of immense wealth, is now a liability. As the world pivots away from fossil fuels, Houston faces the monumental task of reinventing its entire economy. But there is no plan. The political leadership continues to double down on the industries of the past, hoping for another boom that may never come. Meanwhile, the social fabric is fraying. The massive influx of people strained public schools and hospitals. The gap between the ultra-wealthy oil executives in their gated communities and the working-class families struggling to get by has widened into a chasm. The promise of opportunity is ringing hollow for an increasing number of residents who are facing stagnant wages and a soaring cost of living. Houston is a powder keg of economic instability, infrastructural neglect, and climate vulnerability. It's not a ghost town yet, but we are seeing the first exodus. For the first time in modern history, domestic migration to the Houston metropolitan area has turned negative. More Americans are leaving than are arriving. The reversal has begun, and Houston is not alone. Austin, once the quirky, bohemian capital of Texas, has become a victim of its own success. Tech money transformed it into one of the most expensive cities in the country, pricing out the very artists, musicians, and middle-class families that gave the city its soul. Now, with the tech sector contracting, Austin is left with an unaffordable housing market and an identity crisis. Phoenix, Arizona, is a modern metropolis built in the middle of an inhospitable desert. Its entire existence depends on a dwindling water supply from the Colorado River and a power grid strained to its absolute limit by summer temperatures that regularly exceed 110 degrees. It is a miracle of modern engineering, but it's an unsustainable one. One prolonged drought or a catastrophic grid failure could make the city uninhabitable for its 1.6 million residents. We could go on. Cities across Florida are facing an existential crisis from rising sea levels and an insurance market in total collapse. Homeowners are seeing their insurance premiums triple or quadruple in a single year, if they can even get coverage at all. A home you cannot insure is a home you cannot sell. It is an asset that has been effectively turned to zero. This isn't just a local problem. It's a national crisis in the making. The collapse of one of these major economic hubs would have a domino effect across the entire country. Think of the mortgage-backed securities that are bundled with loans from these at-risk areas. A housing market collapse in Texas or Florida could trigger another financial crisis on the scale of 2008. So who is to blame for this impending disaster? The truth is that there is plenty of blame to go around. Blame the short-sighted state and local politicians who chased growth at any cost, handing out massive tax breaks to corporations while neglecting basic infrastructure and services for their actual citizens. Blame the greedy real estate developers who built a disposable world of cheap, stick-built homes on floodplains and in fire zones, with no regard for the long-term consequences. Blame a Federal Reserve that kept interest rates at near zero for over a decade, creating an artificial debt-fueled boom that made this unsustainable sprawl possible. And finally, blame the mainstream media that sold a simplistic and dishonest narrative, cheering on the boomtowns while completely ignoring the underlying risks, leaving millions of ordinary Americans to walk blindly into a trap. We are at a critical inflection point. The map of America is being redrawn once again. But this time, it's not a story of westward expansion or southern boom. It's a story of contraction, of retreat, and of tough choices. The coming years will see a new wave of migration, but it will be a migration of regret. People fleeing the failed promises of the Sun Belt, just as they fled the failed policies of the Rust Belt a generation before. The great reversal is here, and it will spare no one who stands in its path. You need to ask yourself, what is the true foundation of your city's economy? Is it diverse and resilient, or is it a one-trick pony? You need to look at your infrastructure. Can it handle the stresses of a changing climate and a growing population? You need to look at your tax bill, your insurance statement, and your utility costs, and ask if they are sustainable. The American dream is not about a bigger house in a sprawling suburb. It's about stability, security, and a future for your children. For millions of people, that dream is now turning into a waking nightmare. They thought they found paradise, but they've just found the next state of ruin.